Do you think you know how to spot fake people? You don't, because the most dangerous fake isn't the one that lies, it's the one that believes its own lie. Carl Jung once said, "The problem isn't out there, it's in your shadow." If this has ever bothered you, sign up now, because here no one will spare you the truth. Today I'll show you Jung's brutal method for tearing away masks and exposing the falsehood that dances before your soul every day. It's not about analyzing body language. It's not about cheap intuitive tricks. It's about facing the shadow within you. Because until you recognize the false within yourself, you'll continue to attract wolves in sheep's clothing. And I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to open your psychic flesh and reveal the wound you insist on hiding. Do you want to continue living deceived? Close this video now. But if you have the courage to look at the truth you've always avoided, stay until the end, because this could be the first cut that sets you free. Have you ever felt that strange vibration when you meet someone's gaze, as if something inside you is screaming that it's not what it seems? It's the soul trying to speak, the inner eye that Carl Jung would call shadow perception, a spiritual radar that detects fissures where we only see masks. But modern society, with its haste and superficiality, has taught you to ignore this call. They've told you it's paranoia, that it's nonsense, that you need to trust the smile and the handshake, but the soul doesn't lie. It knows when falsehood lurks beneath the skin. The problem is that you, perhaps without realizing it, have numbed yourself. You trust the rehearsed word, believe in the perfect posture, surrender to the empty gleam of eyes trained to deceive. Spirituality isn't closing your eyes to the world, it's opening the symbolic vision that lies buried within you. When you ignore this silent call, you betray yourself. And each time you accept the mask as truth, you sink a little deeper into the abyss of your own blindness. Look around you. Social media is overflowing with frozen smiles, recycled self-help phrases, an endless display of fabricated personas. And you, silently, feel a discomfort you can't name. This discomfort is the eye of the soul trying to pierce the surface. Carl Jung said that the shadow hides precisely where we feign light, and today falsehood is not the exception, it's the rule. The world has become a theater of masks, where every gesture is rehearsed, where every word is a performance. You applaud actors without realizing you're also on stage, wearing your own mask of everything's fine. True spirituality begins when you stop accepting this spectacle as reality. When you realize that every smile can be a curtain, every hug can be a trap, and every look can hide more than it reveals. The eye of the soul is that invisible scalpel that cuts through the veneer and reveals the blood beneath. The problem is that you've learned to trust makeup more than the cut. Think back to the last time you felt a strange pang in your chest but decided to ignore it. Maybe it was at work with a colleague who seemed overly solicitous. Maybe it was in a relationship where excessive affection felt like disguised debt. This is the eye of the soul trying to speak to you. When you silence it, you empower falsehood. And worst of all, not only in others, but also within yourself. Because the mask you fear in the world is the same one you wear in front of the mirror. Jung said that those who don't listen to their soul become hostage to the ego. And the ego loves masks. Intuition is ancestral, but it has been domesticated. If you don't relearn to listen, you will remain blind in a world of wolves dressed as sheep. And this is where we begin to delve. If the eye of the soul exists, why do we fail to see so much? Perhaps because the false have learned to believe in their own goodness. And that's exactly where we'll touch in the next section. The most dangerous are not those who lie badly. They are those who truly believe in their own mask. Carl Jung warned, the most deadly falsehood is the one that requires no effort, because it has already been absorbed by the soul as if it were identity. These false teachers don't act. They don't memorize lines. They don't tremble in front of the mirror. They believe they are the very embodiment of goodness, and that's why you fall. Because while they seek superficial contradictions, the forced laugh, the averted glance, the crossed word, they act with the calm of someone who never needed to rehearse. When a manipulator is convinced their spirituality is pure, there is no remorse. There is pride. When a narcissist believes themselves a savior, there is no guilt. There is a mission. They don't hide because they have already been swallowed by their own falsehood, and this makes them nearly impossible to detect for those who only see the surface. Look around. How many spirituality gurus emerge offering healing, promising enlightenment, selling peace as if it were an off-the-shelf product? Don't doubt it. Many believe they are authentic while feeding their egos with every applause. This is the terrain of refined falsehood. It's not the cheap con artist, it's the charismatic leader convinced of his own sanctity. You've seen this in packed churches, in motivational speeches, in companies run by bosses who preach human values and exploit employees without hesitation. They are false teachers of the truth, and the cruelest thing is that they believe they are genuine. The world applauds them because there is no apparent flaw, but the soul senses it. The invisible eye, Jung described, knows there is shadow disguised as light. And, ironically, applauding without question is the same as feeding the poison that will later destroy you. Think of the friend who prides himself on being the most loyal, but only sees his own loyalty while stabbing those who don't play their part. Think of the relative who preaches unconditional love, but turns cold stone when someone challenges their authority. These are practical examples of false teachers of truth. They don't need to lie because they believe in the narrative they construct. The falsehood isn't in the words spoken, it's in the existential theater they've assumed as reality. The danger is believing these wolves betray themselves with obvious signs. No, they smile confidently because they don't know they're doing anything wrong. It's the shadow integrated in reverse, a spiritual poison that believes it's healing. And herein lies the trap. You think your intuition is enough to protect you, but intuition without awareness is blind. And this brings us to the next cut, the place where your own projection can betray you more than any external manipulator. Do you trust your instincts too much? Do you believe that feeling in your chest is enough to reveal who is false and who is true? Well, let me dispel that illusion now. Intuition without awareness is like a dimmed lighthouse in the middle of a storm. Carl Jung said that what you reject in yourself, you project onto others, and this is where spirituality becomes distorted. How many times have you judged someone as arrogant, simply because they mirrored the arrogance you yourself refused to admit? How many times have you pointed out falsehood when in fact the false one was you, repeating patterns you didn't have the courage to see? Intuition is not an infallible oracle. Often it's just your shadow screaming. And as long as you believe that feeling is knowing, you will continue to fall into the same emotional traps. The soul makes no mistakes, but the ego misinterprets its whispers, and thus illusion is born. Practical example. Perhaps you rejected someone because you felt they were too proud, but deep down it was a reflection of your own need for recognition. Or perhaps you distrusted someone who was too good, when in reality it was you who couldn't stand seeing their authenticity because you live masked. This is projection at work. And Jung warned that projecting is inevitable, but not destiny. The problem is when you blindly believe your first judgment, without questioning whether it's the soul or just a mirror of your distorted shadow. Intuition is a tool, but it needs to be honed consciously. Imagine a blind person with a lantern in their hands. They carry the light, but they don't know where to point it. This is your intuition when you lack self-knowledge. You think you're wise, but you may just be escaping your own falsehood reflected in others. And here comes the cruelest point. You may have pushed away genuine people simply because they reflected pain you didn't want to face. Have you ever thought about that? Maybe that true friend who seemed uncomfortable was just unknowingly showing you what you needed to change. Maybe that relationship you discarded was too honest a mirror for your ego to bear. Projection creates ghosts, and you end up fighting enemies that don't exist, while embracing fake smiles that feed your illusions. This is how external falsehood is sustained, supported by your internal blindness. And if you don't learn to decipher this mechanism, you will continue to believe you are wise, when in fact you are merely a hostage to your own shadow. But the problem doesn't end there, because beyond distorted intuition and projection, there exists an even more dangerous stage, the theater of kindness, where trust is constructed as a trap for your soul. Do you believe that small acts of kindness are proof of character? This is the stage where the most seductive falsehood plays its role. Carl Jung said that where there is shadow, there is also illusion, and nothing deceives more than staged kindness. The manipulator doesn't conquer with shouts, but with favors. He doesn't present himself as an enemy. He dresses as a savior. Each gesture of help is a coin he deposits in your trust, waiting for the right moment to withdraw it all with interest. It's like a patient investor who buys cheap stocks only to profit when you least expect it. True spirituality warns you, not every outstretched hand wants to lift you up. Some just want to measure the strength with which they can pull you down. The soul feels, but the ego allows itself to be bought by rehearsed kindness. Think of that colleague who always seems available to solve your problems, but disappears when you need something simple. Or the friend who is always ready to offer advice, but never willing to listen. These practical examples show how falsehood operates in the theater of kindness. It's not about the act itself, but the hidden agenda behind it. And that's where the shadow operates. Because you, thirsty to be seen and welcomed, will pay any price for a gesture that seems genuine. Carl Jung would call this the sale of the soul in small installments, until you discover yourself an emotional slave. The mask smiles, the heart manipulates, and you applaud as if before a hero. Falsehood has never been so convincing as when it comes disguised as compassion. The danger lies in believing that kindness alone defines authenticity. The modern wolf doesn't bite first, it caresses. The emotional predator doesn't invade, it offers. And you, seduced, forget that theater always has a script. And in this one, the protagonist is never you. The ego believes that collecting favors is proof it has found an ally, when in fact it has merely signed an invisible contract with its own betrayal. Carl Jung knew those who fail to recognize the shadow become victims of false kindness, because they confuse gesture with essence, act with soul. And every time you offer blind trust, you are one step closer to being used as a pawn in the game of someone who never cared for you. But there is something even crueler, thinking that falsehood is fixed, when in fact it transforms and adapts like a living skin. This is the next cut. Falsehood isn't static. It's not a label you stick on and resolve. Falsehood is alive, mutant, adaptable, a second skin that grows along with the shadow. Carl Jung would say that the human soul isn't linear, it's paradoxical. And it's precisely in this paradox that falsehood hides. A person can be tender at home and cruel at work. They can be generous with friends and mean to strangers. They can love deeply and in the next instant crush with indifference. True spirituality understands this movement. Falsehood isn't a fixed mask. It's a dance of masks that adjust to the environment. You err when you believe someone is always false or always true. The danger is that by failing to see this fluidity, you become vulnerable to the next move of whoever masters this game. Look around. How many times have you said this person is trustworthy simply because in a given context they demonstrated loyalty? But context changes, and so does loyalty. Falsehood evolves like a virus. It learns from mistakes, strengthens with each victory, and adapts to survive. And herein lies the brutality. You change too, and your own shadow can manifest as falsehood without you even realizing it. Today you condemn the manipulator. Tomorrow you use manipulation to escape a fear. Today you despise the other person's mask. Tomorrow you don your own to avoid rejection. This dynamism is cruel because it dismantles the illusion of purity. The soul is not transparent crystal. It is a murky river where shadow and light mingle. The problem is that you insist on seeing the world in black and white when falsehood is made of gray nuances that slip through your fingers. Practical example. A boss may seem fair while the company is growing, but in the face of a crisis, reveal themselves to be a tyrant. A friend may be generous while feeling secure, but become envious when threatened. Falsehood is not a state. It is an unconscious strategy of the shadow to preserve the ego. And if you don't learn to recognize this in yourself, you will remain trapped in the error of expecting constancy in what is essentially unstable. Carl Jung called this movement psychic ambivalence. The soul harbors opposites, and those who fail to recognize this are devoured by them. Therefore, every time you try to pin someone down to a role, life surprises you with a new scene. And it is precisely in this clash that the opportunity arises to see the dark mirror of the shadow, not only in others, but within yourself. And that is where the next cut deepens. You spend your life hunting for falsehood in others, but you flee like a coward from the falsehood that dwells within you. Carl Jung said, "What you don't recognize in yourself, you find disguised in others." The shadow is that dark mirror that returns everything you've tried to bury: envy, manipulation, cruelty, fear. The problem isn't the false ones out there. The problem is your refusal to admit that you're also capable of the same darkness you condemn. It's brutal to acknowledge this, but it's the only way out. Authentic spirituality isn't a play of light. It's a dive into the basement of the soul. Every time you encounter a manipulator, you're confronted with your own repressed capacity to manipulate. Every time you're betrayed, it's your shadow screaming that you've betrayed yourself, even if only yourself. The falsehood you fear is merely a reflection of the falsehood you deny. Practical example. Think about that time you called someone selfish. Now be honest, in how many situations have you also acted by placing yourself above everyone else, but preferred to justify it as self-preservation? This is the mirror of the shadow. Or when you pointed out someone else's lie, but forgot the times you kept the truth to yourself to protect your image. Jung knew, we attract exactly what we most reject. If you repel cruelty, you'll likely be targeted by the cruel. If you hide your ambition, you'll be used by the ambitious. It's as if the soul, in its brutal pedagogy, brings to you everything you pretend not to carry. The falsehood of others isn't coincidence. It's a magnet, and the more you deny it, the stronger the attraction. You don't need to believe in destiny to understand. It's pure shadow psychology, and even the soul's silence betrays it. Here's the painful revelation. You're not deceived because the fakes are brilliant, but because your blind spots are gigantic. Every wolf that devoured you was, first, nourished by the lamb you pretend to be. Every betrayal that bled your soul was, in fact, a warning that your own shadow was begging for recognition. The mirror of the shadow doesn't forgive, doesn't disguise, doesn't spare. It brings you face to face with your own falseness until you accept looking at it without masks. True spirituality doesn't invite you to flee, but to enter this mirror like someone diving into dark waters. Because only when you face your own shadow do the fakes lose their power over you. But this dive doesn't happen by chance. It requires method, a brutal path that Jung called dialogue with the shadow. And it is precisely this cut that we will now delve into. There's no shortcut. There's no magic prayer, no ready-made mantra, no self-help book that will do the work for you. Carl Jung was clear. Either you face the shadow head-on, or it will continue to devour you behind your back. Dialogue with the shadow is brutal because it requires naked honesty, without cheap spiritual makeup, without excuses. The first step is relentless observation. Grab a notebook and for a week, write down every judgment you make about someone. He's fake, she's selfish, this guy manipulates. Every word you spit at another is a finger pointing into your soul. Want a practical exercise? Do this. And at the end of the week, when you reread, ask yourself, in what situations do I also act exactly like this? This simple habit, if done courageously, tears away veils that years of superficial meditation never touch. But Jung didn't stop there. The second step is honest confession. Not the kind of confession that alleviates guilt, but the kind that cuts through the ego. When you acknowledge, I also manipulate when I'm afraid, I also lie when I want to be accepted, I also wear masks when I don't want to show my weakness. It's like opening the door to a basement full of monsters, but monsters that have always been yours. True spirituality isn't a blinding light, it's a fire that burns what needs to die. Confession is hard because it shatters the illusion of purity, but it's also liberating because only what is acknowledged can be transformed. Without this brutality, you will continue to believe that the problem is the world, when in fact the falsehood that haunts you is merely an echo of the falsehood you hide. And then comes the most uncomfortable step: conscious experimentation. If you've repressed your ability to say no, practice refusing simple requests. If you've always denied your selfishness, put yourself first in something small, just to feel it. If you've always rejected your manipulative abilities, try observing how you would influence someone if you wanted to. It's not about becoming a monster. It's about no longer being held hostage by unconscious monsters. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites without being torn apart by them, to be generous and selfish, to be honest and manipulative, to be light and shadow. This is the training that transforms you from victim to master of your own soul. Because only those who know their own darkness can walk among masks without being deceived. And that's precisely where the dark vision is born. The next cut that will open your eyes even wider. When you integrate your shadow, something changes in your outlook. It's no longer naivete nor paranoia, it's dark vision. Carl Jung described this as the ability to see in others what you've already recognized in yourself. Falsehood ceases to be a surprise and becomes information. When someone lies, you feel it. Not because you're suspicious, but because you've already experienced the energy of the lie within your own soul. When someone manipulates, you notice because you've faced your own tendency to manipulate. Authentic spirituality doesn't promise angelic purity. It gives you the scalpel of raw perception. And herein lies the brutal beauty. This vision doesn't generate anger, but serenity. You don't react as a wounded victim. You respond as a master who's seen this trick before. The game ceases to be emotional warfare and becomes spiritual chess. Practical example. Someone approaches you with practiced vulnerability, trying to get your attention. Before, you would have jumped in head first, believing you'd found a pure soul. Now you discern, is this fragility real or a tool of manipulation? When someone shows generosity, you don't let yourself be blinded by the isolated giving, but observe if there's a hidden agenda. This is the psychic discrimination Jung spoke of, differentiating the authentic from the false, not by appearances, but by resonance with your own already integrated shadow. The mask falls off by itself when placed before someone who no longer fears masks. It's like lighting a candle in a dark room. You don't need to point out where the shadow is. It simply appears. And when you become that candle, falsehood can no longer hide. But the power of shadow vision isn't just detection, it's choice. Before, you were swept up in the emotional game. Now you decide whether to expose your vulnerability or establish firm boundaries. There's no rancor because there's no surprise. There's no resentment because there's no blindness. The eye of the soul is open, and nothing escapes its perception. Spirituality becomes practical. You protect yourself without having to close yourself off. You trust without giving in to naivete. Carl Jung knew this was the true shield against falsehood. Not isolating yourself from the world, but seeing the world as it is. And the more this vision strengthens, the clearer a brutal truth becomes. Authenticity isn't just defense, it's alchemy. Because when you integrate your shadow, your very presence becomes a natural filter that attracts the genuine and repels the false. This is the next cut. Authenticity isn't a decorative virtue, it's alchemy. Carl Jung said, "What you deny dominates you, what you accept transforms you." And that's what happens when the shadow is integrated. You're no longer easy prey because you no longer need to feign purity. Spirituality at this point stops being a stage and becomes a laboratory. Every pain, every contradiction, every recognized falsehood is transformed into psychic gold. Your presence begins to bother the false because your transparency is a mirror they can't bear. They move away not because you expel them, but because they can't breathe in the rarefied air of your authenticity. It's as if your soul, by dropping its masks, becomes immune to the masks of others. And here's the secret. You don't need to hunt for falsehood. Just be real for falsehood to flee. Practical example. Have you ever noticed how genuine people naturally gravitate toward those who aren't afraid to show their fragility? It's because authenticity creates an invisible magnetic field. Likewise, have you ever noticed that fake people avoid those who don't play along with them? They need an audience, and your authenticity leaves them too naked to continue the act. This alchemy isn't theoretical, it's practical. At work, you attract partners who trust without endless contracts. In relationships, you find people who don't need to wear masks to be accepted. This is more than psychology, it's applied spirituality. Carl Jung would call it the soul's natural filter. When you embrace your own shadow, you no longer need to watch the entire world, because the world itself begins to reorganize itself around you. But be careful. Authenticity doesn't mean perfection. It means accepting that within you lies both light and falsehood, both compassion and cruelty. And it is precisely this acceptance that dissolves the power of the mask. When you show yourself whole, even in the parts that hurt, you become unbreakable. Because nothing anyone tries to use against you remains secret. You already know, you've seen, you've integrated. This is the gold Jung sought, the philosopher's stone of the soul, the alchemy that transforms falsehood into truth, fear into strength, shadow into self. But there's an even deeper cut. Authenticity not only repels the false, it opens within you an almost prophetic vision, the ability to see not only what someone is now, but what they can still become. When Jung spoke of the prophetic function, he wasn't referring to fortune-telling like a cheap magician, but to seeing the hidden potential of people and situations. The soul, when it crosses the darkness of the shadow, gains new eyes. Eyes that see not only the present falsehood, but also what that falsehood can become if confronted or not. This is where spirituality ceases to be survival and becomes real power. You no longer fear being deceived because you understand the inner mechanisms that lead someone to wear masks. What's more, you can distinguish who is forever lost in their falsehood and who can still transform. This reading isn't judgment, it's clarity. And clarity is freedom, because now you choose where to invest your energy and where to simply erect insurmountable walls. Practical example. In a workplace, you identify a colleague who manipulates out of insecurity and one who manipulates for pleasure. The former, perhaps, can be saved if confronted firmly and clearly. You don't waste time trying to change the latter. This prophetic vision spares your soul from unnecessary wear and tear and channels your strength where it can generate transformation. In relationships, the same thing happens. You begin to discern when a crisis is a call for healing or just the repetition of a toxic pattern with no way out. It's brutal, but liberating. Carl Jung said that true freedom isn't doing what you want, but not being a slave to what you don't recognize. And when you recognize falsehood, both within and without, there's no room for surprises. The false may try, but they will never have the power to trap you. And it is at this point that heroic individuation is born. The human being who no longer needs external approval, who no longer lives hostage to paranoia, who no longer carries the fear of betrayal. Because those who have recognized their own capacity to betray can no longer be betrayed in silence. The game loses the element of surprise. The soul attains an almost savage freedom. You no longer bow before falsehood, nor do you need to crush it. You simply walk with it in plain sight, untouched. It's like carrying within you the gaze of an eagle, high, precise, relentless. And it is precisely in this gaze that true power lies. Not the power to isolate yourself, but the power to choose, at every step, who deserves to be by your side. But before you fool yourself into thinking this is the end of the journey, know that this is only the beginning of an even deeper cut. The way this method connects directly with your own life, here and now. Do you still believe they're the problem? Or have you begun to realize that every mask that deceived you was just a reflection of your own shadow? How many times have you called betrayal what, deep down, was just your inability to see your inner falseness? How many times have you run away from the mirror, but given yourself over to the manipulator's embrace, smiling? The question is not how to detect fake people. The question is, how long will you continue to believe in your own mask? If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.